Welcome to the Filipino Podcast. My name is Leland Fox, your host. Today I want to start by talking a little bit about getting older. I'm in my 40s now, and I actually feel pretty great. In fact, last year I went to the doctor for my physical, and she looked me over and she said, "Wow, you're so young." So that made me feel good, even though technically she said, "Wow, you're so young for having blood pressure that high." But still, I'll take what I can get. She said I was young, so it's documented in my medical charts. I'm still young. I do have like this line here in between my eyes that started coming in and not going away. In fact, my son the other day said, "Oh, I just thought that was a scar." I have some more lines on my forehead now that stay pretty much there all the time now, and my hair has gotten a little bit thinner on the back here and coming around to the front. So I took care of that by buzzing it down. But other than that, I don't really worry about that stuff. I do feel pretty good getting older. So knock on wood, so far, getting old has been fine for me. But I think one of the hardest parts about getting older has been that you're not the only one that ages. Your kids get older, your grandparents get older, and of course, your parents start getting older too. Now, that's not to say that my parents are old. They're not old. They're in their 60s, but they are aging. So I just wanted to talk about them just for a little bit, just because, well, they're part of my story. My dad grew up in a town called Pleasant Grove, Utah. Back before it was part of just the Salt Lake suburban sprawl, it used to be a more rural kind of country town. And I picture his upbringing as kind of being Tom Sawyer-esque, though granted I haven't read Tom Sawyer, so I could be way off on that. But he grew up hauling hay, taking care of animals, taking care of fields. He laid bricks, and he was a good wrestler for the Pleasant Grove Vikings, wrestling for the Wrestling Hall of Fame coach Henry. And then he served an LDS mission in Germany, came back, went to school at BYU, Hawaii, and was a tour guide at the Polynesian Cultural Center. And then from there, he went to law school, started a law firm. And I actually worked for him for a few years after I finished law school. And I can tell you that he is basically a machine. He can work without getting tired, and I don't know how he does it. I never figured it out. But that's just kind of the person he is. He's dedicated to his family, to his craft, to the things he does. He does them all really well. And I've mentioned my mom, that she grew up in Manila, Philippines. And I'm not going to tell her story. I'm going to let her tell that story some. But I know she overcame a lot. And I would say that my mom is equally analytical as she is creative. On the analytical side, she went to a renowned high school in the Philippines called Philippine Science High School, where, I kid you not, their mascot is the Scholars. That's how serious they are about academics. To intimidate people, they say, "We are the Scholars." Whereas, again, my dad was a Viking. But on the creative side, she taught herself how to play guitar, how to perform, and she put her guitar skills to use at BYU, Hawaii, where she went to school. She was part of a performing group that toured the world. And she also went on an LDS mission to Spain, so she speaks Tagalog, English, and Spanish fluently. I only speak two languages, English and Babel. So my parents met at school, not in the military, as Joe Coy may joke.
I'm half white, half Filipino. That's what I am. Which means my dad was in the military.
Now, here's an interesting fact about my parents' connection. I mentioned my mom is from Manila, Philippines, and my dad is from Pleasant Grove. Well, my dad's actually from a neighborhood in Pleasant Grove called Manila. And I always thought it was just random that they were both from places called Manila. But I've since learned that the connection is a little stronger than I thought. So let me show you what I found. What I was really trying to do is figure out what was Manila, the Manila where my dad was from, because I know he's from Pleasant Grove, but like, what is Manila? How is he also from Manila? And what I found here was a Pleasant Grove City neighborhood map, and Manila is a neighborhood within Pleasant Grove. It's the northernmost neighborhood. And I also found a news article about that area, the neighborhood. It's from the Deseret News entitled Manila Ward to Celebrate its Centennial on Friday. And just for some background, in the LDS church, churches are divided geographically. It goes region and then stake, and then subdividing the stakes is the ward. So the ward is the smallest geographical grouping, and the wards will go to a specific church building. So this was the Manila ward, was celebrating its 100th year on Friday, which this was published in April of 1990. So 1890 was when this Manila ward was created. And the article says here, the ward was organized on April 20, 1890 as the Pleasant Grove 3rd Ward. For 8 years, the members met in an old schoolhouse until a rock meeting house was completed. On December 18, 1898, then Senator Reed Smoot attended the dedication of the meeting house and suggested the ward change its name to Manila. The Pleasant Grove 2nd Ward had changed its name to Linden, and Linden is now a city in just south of Pleasant Grove, leaving only a 1st and 3rd Ward in Pleasant Grove. So again, I'm guessing they're saying, hey, it doesn't make sense to have a 1st and 3rd Ward and not a 2nd Ward. Since 2nd changed its name to Linden, we should probably change our names off from numbering as well. So ward members accepted Smoot's suggestion. The sinking of the battleship Maine had been in the news, and the peace treaty had been signed in Manila, Philippines during the week of the dedicatory meeting. Here's a picture of Reed Smoot. He's wearing a white top hat, light-colored jacket, pants, light-colored pants and white shoes, looking very dapper. And it's this historical article from Pleasant Grove, plgrove.org, noted that Reed Smoot was a visiting authority from Utah State Presidency. He proposed the name of Manila, and he was inspired by the United States victory that year at Manila Bay in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. And the battle at Manila Bay was the war that ended the Spanish-American War and ended the Spanish reign over, or the ruling over, the Philippines. So there's an actual connection to Manila Pleasant Grove and Manila, where my mom's from. They're both named Manila after Manila, Philippines. And I was trying to remember, I thought it was spelled with 2 L's, and I remember there being a sign where Manila had 2 L's in it, because we always used to make the distinction. My mom's from Manila, Philippines with 1 L. My dad's from Manila, Utah with 2 L's. And so like I said, I remember driving as a kid that there was a sign that said Manila with 2 L's. And I went to look it up. This is a picture from Google Earth. As you can see, the sign says established 1980, which would have been the Pleasant Grove 2nd Ward. It changed to Manila again in 1898. But anyway, it does have Manila here, a sign with 1 L. And this sign has now been, this was an old Google Earth photo, I think from 2011. And this new one, there's a new monument that has Pleasant Grove, Manila sign, established 1890 again with 1 L. So I was thinking, well, why on earth did I think it was 2 L somewhere? And then I found in that Deseret News article that I was looking at earlier, it goes on to say that Robert Monson, who was the chairman for the centennial celebration, remembers when the ward ordered black iron lettering, which said Manila Ward, and the lettering had Manila with 2 L's. So they ordered iron lettering that said Manila Ward for the Manila Meeting House, and it was spelled with 2 L's. And this article says, and it is still that way as of when this was published again, which was in April 1990. And then since then, that building house that was part of the renaming of the Pleasant Grove 2nd Ward to Manila after the Battle of Manila in the Philippines, that church building was sold off, and it's now known as the Stone Gate Weddings and Events Center. So if you're ever at that center in Pleasant Grove, you are stepping back into the history that's connected to the Philippines. So anyway, back to my point here is that my parents' connection is even stronger than I thought it was. They're even more MFEO than maybe I thought as a kid. But growing up, I just always kind of assumed my parents were basically invincible. You always think that they're going to be around. And it's only as I've gotten older and as they've kind of aged that I've realized, no one is getting out of this life alive. My parents are not going to escape Father Time. And it's just made me really think more about trying to preserve my family history, and especially my mom, because she's really the last tie that my family has to the Philippines. My siblings are the last of the Derama line from the Philippines, and we just don't have a lot of connection to it. So my mom really is the last link that we have to the Filipino history, and which is my own history and the history of my children. And so while you can't preserve your parents, you can at least preserve their history, and that's the purpose of this project that I'm doing now. So I want to be able to better understand my Filipino roots, figure out which traditions I can ingrain with my family, and just hopefully give the Filipino connection a fighting chance to be remembered, as I go the way of all the earth as well, which my doctor says will happen sooner than later if I don't take care of my high blood pressure. So for all these reasons, I feel in some weird way called back to learn about the Philippines and to connect with it and to do this program, which is why I'm doing it. And thankfully, I'm not the only one who feels that way. There are a lot of other people out in the YouTube world and the podcast. Well, I haven't found a ton of podcasts, but there are a lot of people in the YouTube world, at least, and others who are feel in some strange way called back to their Filipino roots. And what I want to review and share with you today is the Filipino Story Studios. Has some programs they put together about the history of the Philippines in an animated series. So I'm going to go over that and review that with you. But before I do, there's nothing that makes your taste buds happier than the delightful flavors of White Rabbit candies. That's right, White Rabbit candies. The creamy milk candy wrapped in a fascinating edible rice paper. Why don't you do your taste buds a favor and try White Rabbit today? Welcome to the Part Filipino Podcast, the podcast for people who aren't quite sure if they actually count as Filipino. My name is Leland Fox, and I'm half Filipino. I hope you'll join me as I explore what it means to be part Filipino. So I'm going to be reviewing the Filipino Story's first video, which is what does it mean to be Filipino? But before I do my reaction and review to this video, just want to let everyone know that I did reach 100 subscribers yesterday. It's September 7 as I record this. And so I just want to thank everyone so far for subscribing and joining. So far, I've had over 5,000 views on YouTube and over 200 downloads of the podcast from kind of all over the world. So it's been pretty cool to see the response so far. And although I'm doing this project mostly for me to learn and to learn as I go and to preserve some of these ideas and concepts and my findings for my children, so on and so forth, it is nice to have people join and subscribe and comment. And I do view this as a conversation because, like I say, I'm learning this, so it helps if you join along and share comments and insights as we go and things because I definitely don't know everything. So with that, let's get into the video review. I think the best way to approach this would be I left the link to the original video in the description, and you should go watch that video straight through, see what you think, gather your thoughts, and then come back, because what's going to follow is my discussion and breakdown of my thoughts as I've watched the video and as I've kind of digested things and researched and looked up some questions and thoughts that I had as I watched it. So I'll give you 5 seconds to pause and find the video again in the description. Okay, welcome back. And just so you know, I'll be watching this video with my son Dexter, and we'll get his thoughts at the end, but I'll be sharing my thoughts as we go through this video.
What does it mean to be Filipino? Is it our taste for strong, flavorful cuisine? Is it our obsession with playing basketball, even while wearing flip-flops? Or is it that strong sense of pride that we often feel when we see fellow Filipinos in the international spotlight? Maybe it's something much deeper than that.
So they introduced it, the kind of the main Filipino things is the food, basketball, and then boxing, or I guess technically Filipino celebrities. But I'd heard of the 3 B's of the Philippines being boxing, basketball, and then beauty pageants. Now I obviously knew about Manny Pacquiao as the boxer, but I didn't know about the other things, the beauty pageants or basketball as being something that was popular in the Philippines until I listened to the Recovering Filipino podcast by Jim Agapito. But yeah, apparently basketball is a really big thing there. And interestingly enough, they do have their own professional basketball association called the Philippine Basketball Association. And earlier this year, Dwight Howard, formerly of the NBA, played for the Philippines in a tournament. And I guess he broke a rim during play. So yeah, I guess basketball is a big thing. I don't know anything about the beauty pageants really. And yeah, I get excited when I see a Filipino celebrity. And I am going to one of these days do a video on my favorite Filipino celebrities.
Maybe it's because we all share a mother tongue? Although we don't really have one, since there are over 170 unique Philippine languages.
I'm going to talk more about the languages in just a second.
Some say it's the color of our skin, though that can't be it either, since Filipinos come in many different shades and skin tones.
This is actually something I knew about from my grandparents' story because my grandfather had a darker skin than my grandmother's family. So my grandmother was a more fair-skinned Filipino, and my grandfather was a darker-skinned Filipino. And my understanding is it causes a little bit of issues when they were getting together.
It used to be because we were all from the same archipelago.
The one thing I shouldn't say the word worried, but I'm going to say the word worried about in this video is that it's not like the Philippines history was that they were all this united group of people. At least my understanding, and if you're a Filipino historian, chime in here on the comments. But my understanding is that when the Philippines were settled, it was basically a group of 7,000 different islands, all with their different kind of own tribe group set up. And so that's why when we go back and say there's no mother tongue in the languages, yeah, that's true because they were all their own distinctive groups of people on the various islands. And so they were, although they were all from the same archipelago eventually, my understanding of that, how that happened was basically when Spain came into the picture, they said, hey, all this giant group of islands now belongs to King Philip of Spain, maybe the second or third, can't remember off the top of my head. And this is now known as the Philippines in the name of King Philip. And so that's ultimately how all these different tribes and all these different islands became lumped together. It was an artificial creation of a unity of what were otherwise distinctive and different tribal settlements. And then going back to the languages, like I mentioned before, I would address this, is that in my last video, I talked about someone chimed in and said, hey, just so you know, the language is Filipino with a P, and the people are Filipino. And so I went back and looked at that, and just because, again, going back to the fact that this was a group of 7,000 different islands of many different tribes, there was no unity of language. And beginning in the 1930s, the Filipino president said, we need to create a national identity since we're all now part of this group after they'd fought independence first from Spain and then from the United States of America, which I didn't know. But yes, the Philippines had to gain independence from America after Spain, but then they needed to create a more a unified national identity. And that's where they said we need our own national language. And because there were so many different ones, they had to choose one. And since Manila was the capital, and that's where these decisions were being made, at least this is my version of the history, they chose Tagalog since Tagalog was spoken in Manila, or at least a Tagalog variant, which they called Filipino. But then it was at one point in the Constitution changed to Filipino, then changed back to being called Filipino. But the idea is that the Filipino language was supposed to incorporate all the other main dialects and languages. But even today, you can pull up the languages, and let me do that here. This is from the Philippine Statistics Authority. As you can see, Tagalog, as of 2020, was spoken in 40% of households. So not even a majority of the people in the Philippines are speaking Tagalog. But I mean, again, technically Tagalog is not the national language. It's Filipino, but it is most closely related to Tagalog. So there is no primary language or dialect that's spoken in the Philippines. I guess I don't know how many people would consider themselves speaking Filipino if they do consider that different than Tagalog. But the point being, I agree with this video when they say, yeah, there was no mother tongue. I disagree to the extent they're saying that the Philippines was all one people under this archipelago, because I think that's not what it was.
But now, there are millions of Filipinos scattered all throughout the world, one of the largest recorded diaspora in history.
And I had covered that in one of my episodes where I had reached the conclusion that there were 12.6 million people in the diaspora worldwide, which would include, it was 3.3 million people in the diaspora who are part Filipino, like me.
If we really want to find out what it means to be Filipino, then we have to go back, way back to the story of one of our first ancestors called the Austronesians.
Never heard of them.
They were a group of people that used the oceans and the seas like wide open roads at a time when other cultures were still inventing the wheel. Over 5,000 years ago, the Austronesians possessed advanced sailing technology that allowed them to explore and discover many different lands, one of them being the archipelago that would later become the Philippines.
We were voyagers.
We were voyagers! We were voyagers! We were voyagers! We were voyagers! Why'd we stop?
That's a good question, Moana. Why did we stop? Because this presents it as if the Austronesians were very advanced / the Filipinos in their technology. And what happened? And who are these Austronesians? I did just a little bit of digging, and here's from UCLA's library. It says, in prehistoric times, Austronesian-speaking people covered half the globe in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And they did it all in sailing canoes long before Europeans ventured into open oceans. So they're pretty advanced. Austronesian is the name of a language family. It is derived from austral, meaning southern, and nesia, indicating islands. Basically, they're generations and generations of seafaring agriculturalists who occupied new homelands throughout the Philippines and Indonesia, and sailed eastward into the Pacific as far as the Solomon Islands and the Marianas. Later migrations carried them to Madagascar, Hawaii, and New Zealand. And it is my understanding that these Austronesians sailed these canoes, advanced canoes, and landed in the southern islands of the Philippines called Mindanao, and specifically ended up there in a city called Butuan. And there they developed some boats that the Filipino story is now going to talk about.
Eventually, they developed boats called Balangays, which they used to explore the rivers and coastlines of these newfound islands. Within the boats, early Filipinos worked together as a community in order to make their daring journeys possible. From navigation, fishing, rowing, and steering, each person did their best to contribute to the journey in whatever way they could, because they were literally all in the same boat, and by caring for one another, they survived and thrived.
And my understanding is that they found these balangays in Butuan City when they were digging some drainage canals, and this included some artifacts and information about some of the first voyages. I will say I'm shamelessly stealing this footage from the China Global Television Network. They did a series on the Balangay in Butuan City.
We have historical accounts of the King of Butuan sending the first mission to China, to the Emperor. Imagine the King of Butuan going to China to negotiate for better trade relations.
The advancement of these, or the technological advancement of these Balangay vessels was also noted by the Spanish. Here's the founder of a sailing club in Butuan City.
When the Spanish arrived in the Philippines in the 1500s, they wrote about how Filipino seafarers were far superior in the sea in terms of skills, in terms of navigation, and even their vessels. There was a quote from the accounts of Pigafetta,
Pigafetta being one of the explorers that was accompanying Magellan,
wherein they wrote about boats that would sail like flying birds, wherein he would compare the galleons of the Spanish to boats made of lead, because the Filipino vessels, some as large or even larger than the Spanish boats, were very swift in the water, were very fast, were far superior in performance to the Spanish.
This strong sense of togetherness took root at the core of Philippine culture, which is why we still call a small community in the Philippines a barangay today, named after the Balangay boats of our ancestors that represented cooperation and collaboration.
I think that's one of the coolest parts of the video, how that ties together. I mean, it's obviously just a change of one letter. It replaces the L in Balangay with an R for barangay. And that's not accidental, as they say in the video. Back to the former engineer of Butuan.
The Balangay symbolizes our unit government. We are made up of archipelago and people travel by boat. These boats cannot just be small boats, but they are also large enough to accommodate families. So this has become a symbol of a unit family in our country.
This idea of extending a helping hand to our neighbor in any possible way became known as Bayanihan, from the Filipino word bayan, which means hero.
I mentioned the concept of Bayanihan in a prior episode, and I wasn't sure if I was pronouncing it right, and I didn't. I'm hoping I pronounce it right. Is Bayanihan, Bayanihan, is the word. I don't know what that means, but I just recognize that it's there. Well, now I know how it's pronounced, and now I know what it means, so making progress here.
And examples of the Bayanihan spirit can be seen all throughout Philippine history. From tragic wars, natural disasters, and other calamities that the country has faced, it's the Bayanihan spirit that Filipinos have counted on to keep them going. Filipinos being heroes to one another to help their brothers and sisters in their community, expecting nothing in return.
Now, obviously, this is a statement that's painting the Filipino people in very broad strokes. I agree with it for most people. For most Filipinos I've personally met, absolutely true. But I also think that that is oversimplifying the history of the Philippines, and clearly not everyone in the Philippines is that way. For Filipino American History Month, I am going to cover President Ferdinand Marcos and his group and that situation with martial law. And clearly, that's not a situation where the Bayanihan spirit prevailed. And I know that's not the only situation in the Philippines where there's not other Filipinos keeping people down. So I'm sure that's a very complicated question as to why does it continue to be a developing country rather than a leading country? Because if I look back at what we've been talking about so far, I see that Austronesians, they were a technologically advanced society, being very progressive and in their time and in their day. What happened? That's what Moana asks that. Why did we stop? Where did the history take another turn? My hypothesis is that it could have been when the Philippines was conquered by Spain and then the United States, and then has tried to have to forge its own identity among a lot of competing ideas on what that should be. But I'm new to the history, and that's something I'm going to explore. But so far, yeah, I'd say that this part of the video is the one where I say, I agree, but I know it's more complicated than that.
Today, the Bayanihan spirit lives on, expressed in many unique ways by modern Filipinos in the archipelago, as well as in distant foreign shores. Why do you think so many Filipinos want a job that involves helping others?
This is another question where I think on the surface it sounds very nice, but I think the answer is more complicated than Bayanihan. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's more complicated than just that, because I do think, while it's fascinating that the Philippines has one of the largest diaspora in the world, why is that? Is that a good thing? Questions. These are questions I have.
Or that we are known as one of the most hospitable cultures on the planet. Or that Christmas season, a time of sharing and giving, lasts for 4 months in the Philippines.
I want to learn why they do that too. That's something I didn't know till I started this.
It's because deep within every Filipino, no matter how far we may be from our homeland, the flames of our past forge the Bayanihan spirit into our hearts. And that's what we carry with us, no matter where we are. So to answer the question, what does it mean to be Filipino? Well, if we look at our history, I guess you could say that being Filipino means to care, to share, and to love. To love your family, your neighbor, and your community. Because at the end of the day, no matter where we are in the world, we are one people on the same journey, on the same boat.
You know, I know I've raised a lot of questions and had a lot of commentary about this video, but overall, watching the video it did resonate with me. And I'm not sure. I like to think that's because I do have this Filipino spirit within me, at least half of it, that connects with these things, that has the Bayanihan spirit within me. And I do feel that I am that way. I like to serve. I like to help. I want to be part of a community. The movies about teams coming together are the movies that get me to almost shed a tear. I never cry at movies, though, because why would I do that? But anyway, so like I mentioned, I watched this with my son Dexter, and I want to let you hear what his thoughts are. Hey, Dexter. Now you come up here.
Okay.
Scoot closer and tell me what you thought about that.
Was very inspiring.
Was it?
Yes, it was.
Which part of it?
That we help each other just because.
That's what I thought too. Okay, so now if I were to ask you, what does it mean to be Filipino? quarter Filipino?
It means to help people a quarter of the time.
That is correct. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for today. See ya.